Hello, I'm Chris Platt. I'm a speech and language therapist, and I'm currently making a short series of video tutorials on really useful academic words, words that are used in education and learning, words like compare, evaluate, summary. This is a series that has been commissioned by Fareham Academy, which is one of the schools that we partner with. This video is an introduction to that series, and in this video I'm going to try and explain what these important words are, why they are so important, and how we can help students to learn them deeply. And that depth of learning is important. We will all have words that we recognise. Maybe we know something about them, but we might not fully understand them or be confident to use them. Words like obtuse, emollient, phlegmatic. With these academic words, these words for learning, we really want students to have as deep and full knowledge as we can. So let's start by having a look at what these words are. A good place to start is with the work of these researchers here, Beck, McKeown and Kucan, who are professors working at the University of Pittsburgh, and they have collectively put a lot of research into vocabulary and vocabulary instruction. At the heart of their approach is this concept of words being in tiers, different tiers of words, which you can see I've drawn out for you here. At the bottom, tier 1, are the kind of basic words we use every day, like dog, jump, book. The very familiar everyday vocabulary. It's generally not taught in school, particularly not once we're past the early years. Jumping up to the top tier, tier 3, words in this tier tend to be quite uncommon words. In school, they're often specific to a particular subject. In work, they might be those technical words that you might need to know as part of your job, but most people can get by perfectly happily without knowing. So thinking about school, this would be words like biotic and mitosis and antigen. Uncommon and very topic subject specific words. These words are the words that generally are taught explicitly in school. They're part of the curriculum. They're explained in curriculum workbooks. And now in the middle, we have the tier 2 words. And words at tier 2 can be quite common, particularly in writing. So words like cautious, reluctant, exaggerate. But these words are often not directly taught. And so one fantastic skill for your child or your student to learn is to notice words that they don't know, for example, when they're reading, and to try and find out what they mean. And there are different ways they could do that. They could learn to use a dictionary. They could look word meanings up online. They could ask their teacher. They could ask their parent. Now, within this second tier, there are also a lot of words that are used in learning, again, across different subjects, words like estimate, interpret, contrast. So I'll write those here. Now, these words are often not taught directly, perhaps because they don't belong to a specific subject or a particular topic. So, for example, in science, pupils might be asked to evaluate an experiment about polysaccharides. And whilst the word polysaccharides likely would be taught up there in tier 3, the word evaluate, which would be in tier 2, might not be. Similarly, in geography, students might be asked to investigate reasons for increased precipitation in parts of the world. Again, it's likely they will have been taught the meaning of precipitation, but maybe not the meaning of investigate. So it's these words, which in this series I will refer to as academic vocabulary, that it can be particularly important to provide extra explanation and support with. So hopefully that's given you a sense of what academic vocabulary is, and in the following tutorials the words I will be covering are, in no particular order, affect, summarise, perspective, compare, critical, simplify, sequence, increase, evaluate, equivalent and interpret. But that is just a small subset of these words. There are many more to learn, and a really good source for this vocabulary is the High Incidence Academic Word List that was drawn together by Averil Coxhead at Victoria University in Wellington. And this is a list of 570 words that appear frequently in teaching and in academic books. So it's definitely worth looking through some of those words with your child, with your pupils, seeing what words they know already and what words it would be most helpful for them to learn. I will put a reference to that word list into the video description. And so the next question is, why is this important? Why does it matter? Well, put simply, to do well at school, to achieve to their potential, students need to know and be confident with as many of these words as possible. It's what Alex Quigley refers to in this book as cracking the academic code. And his point is that knowing this academic vocabulary and being confident with it is really important for pupils if they are to fully access their curriculum. If you're a teacher watching this, I would definitely recommend reading his book, Closing the Vocabulary Gap, and I'll put a reference to that in the video description. Okay, so on to the most important part. How do we teach these words? Well, clearly this is just a brief introduction, so if you do want more detail, I would advise reading the books, the one I've just referred to by Alex Quigley, and also this one by Beck, McKeown and Kucan, Bringing Words to Life. It's also really worth looking into WordAware by Stephen Parsons and Anna Brannigan. They're both speech and language therapists, and WordAware is their program, their approach for teaching vocabulary in schools. It's also worth looking at courses by Elklan. Full disclosure, I am an Elklan tutor, but that's not why I'm recommending them here. The courses are excellent, and in their core courses they have a specific module on vocabulary development. I've borrowed ideas through the tutorials from both WordAware and Elklan. I have asked them, they've said that's okay, and I will put links to their training in the video description. So I'm not going to be going into huge detail about vocabulary learning in these tutorials, but you'll see that I do stick to some key principles in the videos, which I will summarise here. And the first one is to choose the words to teach carefully. Choose those that will give you the biggest bang for your buck. So, for example, in the academic word list that I referred to a moment ago, one word is analyse, and that was a very commonly used word. And another word was append, which was less commonly used. Now, if a pupil doesn't know either of them, then it makes sense to start by teaching the word that is used most frequently, to teach analyse. If you're a parent watching this, you can ask your child's teacher or their tutor for suggestions of words to target. The words that I'm covering in these tutorials were selected by teaching staff at Fareham Academy as being particularly important ones to target and to ensure that all their pupils know. A second principle is to provide simple explanations of words, because often these words are slippery, they are difficult to pin down. And then what can happen is when we try and teach the word, we use even more complex words and even more complex language, and the student just gets even more confused. So give the simplest explanation you can, and often it is much more helpful to teach through examples rather than definitions. Having the right dictionary can help. I like this one. You'll see that I use it in the videos. It's not product placement. I have no relationship with Collins at all. But I like that dictionary because it uses real examples of how to use words, and the definitions are written in a way that are simpler and easier to understand than in many other dictionaries. Even here, though, you have to be selective. Teach what's most important. Teach what's most relevant at that time, most relevant in that context. So, as an example, one of the words I cover in this series is affect, Well, if I look in the dictionary, there are 15 different examples of how this word could be used. We could talk about special effects in films, somebody's personal effects, so what they own. We could talk about doing something for effect, like putting on an accent for effect. Now, clearly it would just be confusing to try and teach all of those at the same time. So you'll see in my video, I focus just on a single central meaning of effect, being about the change that one thing causes to something else. You'll also see in the videos that although I generally start by giving a very quick explanation of the word, most of my initial focus is on the sound structure of the word, how it's said, and repeating that. And the reason for that is simple. It's a key part of the word-aware approach that I referred to earlier. It's hard to learn the meaning of a word if you haven't got an imprint of that word, of how it sounds, stored already. So getting that sound pattern of the word stored first then makes it easier to hook the meaning onto that. And a key part of that is repetition. I hear lots of different figures about how often people need to hear a word in order to remember it, in order to learn it. People need to hear a word 10 times. People need to hear a word 15 times. People need to hear a word 17 times. The reality, surely it depends. It will depend on the person. It will depend on the word. It will depend on the context in which it's being taught. But the reality is also that it is always lots. We need to hear words lots of times and at lots of different times in order to learn them. And so that repetition is crucial. A further principle is to teach the whole word. So the sound structure of the word and the meaning, but also teaching students, helping them understand how the word is used. So giving examples so they can see how that word is used, and also thinking about other ways that that word might be said or written. So, for example, if a student is learning about compare, they should also learn comparison. If a student is learning about summary, they should also be taught summarise, as they might not automatically make the links between those words. This is perhaps easiest to show through an example, so I'll do that now for one of the words I cover in this series, effect. This is an example of a word map. I've adapted this one from Elklan. In particular, I've used their idea about colour coding. So here you can see the information about the sound structure of the word is in red and the meaning in green. They have a helpful rhyme for that. Red for what you said, green for what you mean. So in red, look at what sound the word begins with, how many syllables it has. Effect. In green, provide a simple explanation of the meaning, a simple definition. So effect meaning the change that one thing makes to something else. It can be very helpful to have a visual image of a word. You don't need great art skills. Here there's just a little stick figure looking a bit horrified because the effect of the wind was to blow off their hat. I've extended Elklan's idea to look at blue for how to use. So blue for examples of when the word might be used. For example, effect would be used in science, looking at the effect of turning on electricity or the effect of different experiments. In our lives, the effect of a late night might be that we're sleepy and we're tired the next day. And then finally, grey for another way, look at other ways that that word might be said, might be written. So effects, effective. If we had another word up here like summary, here we'd have summarise, summaries. So that helps students to learn that all those words are connected. I really like completing word maps on paper or in a book. They can then be stored and looked at again. That's really useful for revision. That revising of words, revisiting words is really important. We'll come on to that in a bit. You don't need to follow this exact pattern, but thinking about this idea of whole word learning, the sound structure, the meaning, how it's used in context, examples, and how else the word can be said, can be written, is really helpful. Okay, just a couple of extra principles. I mentioned earlier that providing examples of how the word can be used is helpful when teaching a word, and you'll see in the videos that I aim to do that where I can. That might be through working through an example of the word. It might be through using video clips. It might be through using pictures. Ideally, it would be through all three. The more examples and the more variety of examples, the better, as that will help students to develop a more complete, a more rounded and a deeper understanding of that word. It is also helpful to look for opportunities for that word to be used in context. For example, if your child is learning the word evaluate, then ask them to evaluate things at home. They could evaluate their dinner, what they watched on TV, their brother's haircut, a new computer game. And finally, I mentioned earlier that revisiting and revising words is really important, and that really is the case. If we don't do that, there is a danger that that word learning will be lost. So words can be revised by continuing to provide examples of the word, continuing to provide opportunities to use it, by looking back at previous word maps that have been created. One of the simplest ways of revising words is through using a word pot, which is another idea from WordAware. Here's an example. And all you do, whenever a word has been taught, you write it down, or the student can write it down, and it goes in the pot. And then you pull words out over the coming weeks and revise them. And that could be through discussing the word. It could be through having one person describe the word for somebody else to identify. It could be by giving an example of the word. Or it could be by asking questions that make students engage with the word, think about the word. Do you like that word? Why do you like that word? When do you think you'll next use that word? If you are a parent watching this, grabbing a couple of words from a word pot is a really simple warm-up activity or finishing activity to homework. If you're a teacher, having a word pot on your desk can be a great starter for a lesson, or a filler activity, a transition activity, can be used for plenaries. If you work in a secondary school, it's probably not realistic to have a single word pot, so then perhaps have some resealable bags. You could then have different sets of words for different year groups. Okay, I've done enough talking. I'll crack on with the tutorials. I really hope you find them helpful, and I'll see you soon. Bye.